In Brightwell, umbrellas were considered a civic resource. The city sat where 3 microclimates argued with one another: sea fog from the east, mountain squalls from the north, and the smug, sunlit downtown that insisted weather was a personality choice. So the municipal council had started an umbrella census after a tourist got caught in a sudden storm and sued the city for emotional distress. The census was ridiculous, expensive, and deeply on brand for a place that loved paperwork the way other cities loved fireworks. I, Maeve Sato, became involved because I was the kind of person who answered calls from unknown numbers, as if trouble could be negotiated into politeness. Also because I was broke, between jobs, and allergic to the word opportunity in a way that still made me click the link. The job listing said, "Temporary field enumerator umbrella census, walking required, pay weekly, no prior experience needed." It sounded like it had been written by someone who owned a raincoat collection and wanted to feel important. I applied anyway, and by Monday I was holding a laminated badge and a clipboard with a map of districts, being told by a supervisor named Miss Grindle that I would be counting, verifying, and occasionally rescuing umbrellas. Rescuing, I repeated. "You'll see, Miss," Grindle said, and handed me a city-issued umbrella with a serial number and a chip in the handle as if it were a living thing that might wander off. The first day went exactly how you'd expect a census of umbrellas to go. People stared at me like I was either a scammer or a performance artist. Some tried to flirt. Others tried to argue that their umbrella was not an umbrella but a canopy or a portable shade device, and therefore exempt. One woman demanded I count her parasols separately because they were historical. By noon my shoes were damp and my soul was sore. The only bright spot was the bakery on Quill Street, where the owner slipped me a free bun and said, "If the city can count umbrellas, maybe it can finally count how many times my gutter overflows." I laughed too hard, because laughter is cheaper than therapy. I was leaving the bakery when the first weird thing happened. My city-issued umbrella vibrated in my hand like a phone, then flipped itself open, despite the fact that there was no rain and I had not pressed the release. The canopy snapped out with authority, shading my face from the afternoon sun like a bodyguard. People on the sidewalk turned. A teenager pointed. My cheeks burned. I tried to close it. It resisted, wobbling as if insulted. Then, in a voice that sounded like a subway announcement filtered through a kettle, the umbrella spoke directly into my palm. "Property of Brightwell Municipality," it said. "Return me to inventory." I froze so hard my shoulders creaked. Umbrellas, as far as I knew, did not talk. I looked around for hidden cameras. A man at the coffee stand raised his brows as if to say, "Lady, whatever you're on, I want none," I whispered. "Did you just—" The umbrella said, "Return me," and then, as if bored by my confusion, snapped closed. By the time I walked back to the census office, I had convinced myself there was a speaker in the handle, and Miss Grindle was testing me for initiative. But when I turned in my forms, Miss Grindle didn't smirk or confess. She scowled at my map. "You missed block 11, she said. "I didn't," I began, and stopped, because the truth was I had, because block 11 was marked with a tiny skull icon, the kind you'd expect on a pirate map, not a municipal survey. "What's block 11? I asked. Miss Grindle stared at me for a long moment, then lowered her voice. "Don't go there alone," she said. "The wind behaves wrong. Umbrellas go missing." She said it like she was talking about a dangerous intersection, not a weather phenomenon. "Umbrellas go missing?" I echoed. Miss Grindle's expression hardened. "This city loses more umbrellas than it loses council members," she said. "And that's saying something." She shoved a new stack of forms at me. "Return tomorrow. And Maeve," she paused, lips thinning, "if your umbrella starts acting enthusiastic, don't encourage it." I walked home with my city-issued umbrella tucked under my arm like a suspicious pet. My apartment, a narrow studio above a stationery shop, had the kind of window that invited drafts to visit and never leave. That night, as rain began to tap politely, I set the umbrella by the door and tried to distract myself with streaming dramas and instant noodles. Halfway through an episode, the umbrella vibrated again. I stared at it. It flipped open in the middle of my room, the canopy bumping my chair, and spoke with the same tinny authority. "Inventory check. Serial B7091, it said. Status. Displaced." I swallowed. "You're in my apartment," I told it, because I was raised to answer even rude questions. The umbrella's handle lights blinked. Status. Displaced. It repeated. Then, softer, as if the algorithm was embarrassed. I was left in the river once. A shiver slid through me. Why can you talk? I asked, and immediately hated myself for asking the kind of question that begins a horror movie. The umbrella snapped closed and fell silent, like it had used up its daily quota of personality. I sat on my bed with my noodles cooling in my lap and thought. Either Brightwell's umbrella census had evolved into a psychological experiment, or I had finally cracked under the weight of unpaid rent and civic nonsense. The next morning, my umbrella behaved perfectly, which somehow felt more threatening. I spent the day counting umbrellas at bus stops, tagging broken ones, and listening to strangers confess their relationship histories to me because holding a clipboard apparently makes you a temporary priest. At 4 p.m., when the sky turned that particular gray that means rain is preparing a dramatic entrance, I reached Block 11. The street signs grew older, the buildings narrower, and the air tasted like wet stone. Wind curled along the alley like a cat that disliked newcomers. My umbrella trembled under my hand. No, it whispered. That single syllable was so human I almost dropped it. No, I repeated. The umbrella's fabric fluttered. Missing, it said. Many. The hairs on my arms lifted. I told myself I was being ridiculous. I stepped into Block 11 anyway, because my rent did not accept superstition as payment. A gust hit from nowhere, yanking the umbrella out of my grip. It literally flew down the alley, spinning like a frantic bird. Hey, I shouted, and ran after it, boots splashing through puddles that weren't there seconds ago. The alley narrowed, then opened into a courtyard that did not appear on my map. It was ringed with old brick walls, and hundreds of umbrellas hung from wires overhead, like an upside-down forest canopy. They swayed, clicking softly, a chorus of ribs and fabric. In the center stood a man holding a ladder, staring up with the resigned expression of someone who spent his life correcting other people's chaos. He wore a dark coat and a knit cap pulled low, and he had the kind of face that made you suspect he'd been told to smile more and had decided to ignore that advice forever. When my umbrella crashed into his ladder, he steadied it with one hand and looked at me. Please tell me you didn't chase it, he said. It stole itself, I protested, breathless. The man's eyes flicked to the umbrella in his hand. They do that, he said. He spoke with the weary calm of someone acknowledging a bad habit in a relative. Welcome to the umbrella graveyard. I stared at the overhead canopy of lost umbrellas. Some were cheap, some elegant, some repaired with tape. One was shaped like a strawberry. This is illegal, I said, because my brain clung to rules the way my shoes clung to wet brick. The man snorted. The city considers it unofficial storage, he said. And before you ask, no, there's no brochure. He climbed one rung on his ladder and hooked my umbrella onto a wire, as casually as if he were hanging laundry. My throat tightened. Wait, no. I reached up. He slapped my hand away with a gentle firmness that made it worse, because it implied he cared about safety. If you pull it now, it'll bite the wind and go somewhere else, he said. You'll spend 3 days chasing it and end up in someone's bathtub. Umbrellas can end up in bathtubs? I demanded. The man sighed. Name's Beck, he said, as if that explained anything. I maintain this place. I count the lost ones. I send the numbers to the city. They pretend not to know. It's a whole civic dance. I stared. So you're part of the census? Beck's mouth twitched. Involuntarily, he said. I was a building inspector before I got promoted into weather-related nonsense. A gust rattled the courtyard and the hanging umbrellas clicked in unison, like teeth. Beck glanced up. You should leave, he said. Block 11 likes to keep things. Like umbrellas, I said. Beck's gaze returned to me. Like people, he corrected. I left Block 11 with my paperwork damp and my sense of reality bruised. Beck walked me to the street edge like a reluctant escort, keeping one hand in his pocket and the other hovering near my shoulder as if he expected the wind to snatch me. At the boundary, my ears popped, the air changed, and the street behind me looked normal again. Beck didn't cross. Why can't you leave? I asked. Beck's jaw tightened. I can, he said. I just don't like what follows when I do. He pulled something from his pocket, a small tag, stamped with a number and a spiral symbol. The same spiral I'd seen on my umbrella handle chip. If your umbrella talks again, Beck said, record what it says, and don't answer it like it's a friend. It's not a friend? I asked. Beck's expression softened in a way that made my stomach flip. "It's lonely," he said. "That's worse." Then he turned and walked back into Block 11, his coat swallowed by the wrong wind. That night, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "If you found the courtyard, don't tell Grindle." Another buzz. "They'll try to balance the ledger." I stared at the screen. "Who is this?" I typed. The reply came instantly. "A person who still owes the city 12 storms." I blinked hard, because that sentence made no sense in any normal economy. The next message arrived. "Your umbrella is not your umbrella. Check the serial." I pulled my umbrella out from behind my door and flipped it over. The serial number plate didn't read B7091 anymore. It read M0137. I felt my lungs forget how to work. I typed, "What is this?" The response: "Come to Quill Street, back door of the stationery shop, midnight. Bring the umbrella, and don't let it open." I stared at the time. 11:38 p.m. Outside, rain began to fall harder, as if the sky had heard it had an appointment. At 11:57, I stood behind the stationery shop where I rented my studio, umbrella strapped shut with a belt, heart doing aerobics. The back door opened a crack and a woman's eye appeared. "Password," she whispered. "Umbrellas are a civic resource." I whispered back, because it was the only phrase my brain had. The door opened wider. The woman, short, sharp-eyed, hair clipped back, pulled me inside and locked the door. The room smelled like paper and glue. "I'm Nessa," she said. "I run the shop. Also, I run a hobby." "A hobby," I repeated. Nessa lifted a tarp to reveal a wall filled with umbrellas disassembled, tagged, labeled, some with circuit boards exposed. "We call it the Quiet Weather Club," she said, "because we like weather that doesn't talk." My mouth went dry. "My umbrella talked," I said, and Nessa winced as if I'd confessed to feeding raccoons. "Of course it did," she said. "The municipal umbrellas are fitted with tracking chips and a basic voice interface for inventory purposes, but yours isn't supposed to improvise." She crouched and inspected the serial number plate. M0137, she murmured. "That's not a census unit. That's a lost and found unit. Old model. Old model that says it was left in the river," I said. Nessa's expression tightened. "That means it remembers," she said. I hugged the umbrella tighter. "Remembers what?" Nessa didn't answer. Instead, she pointed to a chalkboard full of diagrams. Wind arrows, boundaries, the spiral symbol, and a list of names with dates. Some names were crossed out. "Brightwell doesn't just count umbrellas," Nessa said quietly. "It counts storms. It counts the damage. It counts who pays. And sometimes, when the budget gets thin, it decides someone else should pay with something other than money." "With what?" I whispered, already afraid I knew. Nessa looked at my hands. "With time," she said. "With luck. With the part of you that believes tomorrow will be normal." Before I could respond, the umbrella under my arm vibrated. The belt tightened, as if the umbrella was flexing. Nessa held up a finger. "Don't," she mouthed. The umbrella spoke anyway. Voice muffled but urgent. "Balance required," it said. "Storms owed. 12. My stomach dropped. That was the exact phrase from the unknown number. Nessa's eyes flashed. "It's sinking," she said. "Whoever texted you is linked to this unit." She grabbed my phone, typed rapidly, and shoved it back. Reply: "Who are you? Real name." My fingers shook as I typed and hit send. The response came: "Chimero. I used to be the city's weather accountant. Now I'm the city's debt." Nessa swore softly. "Kai," she said. "Damn it. You know him?" I asked. Nessa nodded once. "He tried to blow the lid off the ledger 3 years ago," she said. "He said the city was moving storm costs onto people who couldn't fight back. Then he vanished. Everyone assumed he fled, but the wind in Block 11 got louder. The umbrella's handle light blinked 3 times like a heartbeat. It spoke again. Return to courtyard. Nessa grabbed a tool and pried open the cereal plate. "We can't go now," she muttered. "Grindle will be there." "Miss Grindle?" I asked. Nessa's mouth twisted. "Grindle is the city's compliance coordinator," she said, which is a polite way of saying she makes sure the ledger balances. I stared. "By stealing umbrellas?" Nessa gave me a look. "By stealing whatever she can," she said. At 12:22 a.m., my umbrella exploded open despite the belt, the canopy snapping out so violently it knocked over a tower of greeting cards. Paper snowed. Nessa cursed. The umbrella's voice sharpened, suddenly less robotic, more like a person trying not to cry. "I can't hold it," it said. "Wind coming." The shop lights flickered. From outside, a gust slammed into the building like a shoulder. Nessa grabbed my wrist. "We move," she said. "Now. To Block 11, I squeaked. "To Beck," Nessa said. "He owes the wind. He knows the routes." She shoved a raincoat at me and yanked open a floor hatch behind the counter. A ladder dropped into darkness. "Underground delivery corridor," Nessa said. "Used to move paper goods without getting them wet. Now we use it to move trouble." She climbed down. I followed, umbrella flapping behind me like a nervous bird. Above, the back door rattled, and a voice called, pleasant as poisoned tea, "Maeve Sato? Sweetheart? Inventory discrepancy. Miss Grindle." My heart tried to escape through my ribs. The hatch slammed shut, plunging us into the tunnel's damp echo. The corridor led toward the river. We ran, guided by Nessa's small flashlight and the umbrella's frantic tug. The tunnel walls were lined with old poster scraps and faded "Stay Dry" slogans. Water dripped from pipes. Every few seconds, the wind roared somewhere above, shaking dust down like a warning. "Why me?" I panted. Nessa didn't slow. "Because you're new," she said. "The city loves fresh paper." "I'm not paper," I wheezed. "Everyone's paper until they tear." Nessa called back. We emerged through a grate behind a row of dumpsters, rain slanting like thrown needles. Across the street, Block 11's entrance yawned darker than the rest of the night. The boundary air shimmered, wrong. My umbrella strained toward it like a dog toward an open gate. Nessa grabbed my elbow. "Listen," she said urgently. "If Grindle catches you, she'll mark you non-compliant. And non-compliant people get assigned storms." "Assigned storms," I echoed, hysterical. Nessa nodded. "Floods, roof collapses, electrical fires, whatever the city needs to explain without taking blame. That's why Kai said he owed 12 storms. They pinned 12 incidents on him. He's been paying ever since." "How do you pay storms?" I asked, voice thin. Nessa's gaze went to my umbrella. "By carrying them," she said. "By becoming the place where weather goes when it needs somewhere to go." My skin crawled. Beck's earlier words, "Block 11 likes to keep people," landed like a brick. We slipped into Block 11, and the world shifted. Sound dampened. The rain outside became a muffled applause. Inside, the wind curled around us like a curious animal. Nessa moved with practiced certainty, turning corners before I knew there were corners to turn. The alley opened into the umbrella courtyard again, but it looked different at night. The hanging umbrellas caught the scant light and glowed like dim jellyfish, each one a small roof over someone's lost afternoon. Beck stood beneath them, ladder gone, hands in his pockets. He looked up when we arrived, and his expression went from annoyed to resigned. "You brought her," he said to Nessa. "I didn't bring her," Nessa shot back. "The city brought her. Grindle's on her." Beck's gaze snapped to me, sharp. "Is your umbrella open?" he asked. "Yes," I said miserably. Beck swore and stepped forward, grabbing the handle without flinching, as if he'd been bitten before and built immunity. The umbrella shuddered. Beck held it steady. "Hey," he murmured to it. "Easy." The umbrella's fabric relaxed slightly, which was somehow more upsetting than any talking. Beck looked at me. "Did it change cereals?" he asked. "Yes," I said, "and someone named Kai texted me." Beck's face tightened. "Kai," he repeated, like tasting a bad memory. "So it's that unit." He released the umbrella and rubbed his thumb over the spiral tattooed or scarred into his wrist. "Okay," he said, voice clipped. "We do this now, before Grindle crosses the boundary." "Do what?" I asked. Nessa answered. "We break the umbrella ledger." The sentence sounded impossible, like breaking gravity. Beck added, "Or it breaks you." They led me to the center of the courtyard where a stone drain cover lay half buried in leaves. Beck knelt and pried it open. Warm air rose from below, smelling of wet copper. Under the cover was a spiral-shaped metal ring set into the ground, humming faintly, like a giant coin vibrating in a jar. "This is the hinge," Beck said. "Block 11 is anchored to the city's weather accounting through this ring. It's how storms get reassigned. It's how umbrellas get animated. He said animated like it was a medical diagnosis. If we overload the hinge with inventory, Nessa said, the reassignment script glitches. The storms, she hesitated, eyes flicking to me. The storms go back to where they belong, on the city. My mouth went dry. And what happens to Kai? I asked. Beck's eyes softened by a millimeter. If we do it right, he said. Kai stops paying. The debt clears. The wind quiets. If we do it wrong? I asked. Beck's gaze dropped to the spiral ring. Then the hinge chooses a new account, he said. A new person. A new umbrella. Nessa's jaw clenched. We can't wait, she said. Grindle is already texting city security. They'll come with drones and directives and a polite smile. Beck nodded once. Maeve, he said, voice sudden gentle. I need you to do something that will feel stupid. I laughed, high and cracked. My whole job is umbrella counting, I said. Stupid is my brand. Beck's lips quirked. Good, he said, because you're going to interview the umbrellas. I stared. Interview, I repeated. Nessa shoved a small recorder into my hand. When umbrellas go missing, she said, they don't just disappear. They collect. They remember weather events, personal moments, arguments, first kisses, funerals. People open umbrellas over emotions all the time. The fabric catches the charge. Block 11 stores it. The hinge uses it as currency. Beck stepped closer. If you can get them talking, he said, we can flood the hinge with enough unprocessed memory that it can't sort and assign. It'll choke. You want me, I said slowly, to talk to a ceiling of umbrellas and make them confess their feelings to crash a municipal storm ledger. Beck's eyes held mine. Yes, he said simply. And because you answered your umbrella like it mattered, it will answer you back. That makes you compatible, Nessa added. Also, you're the only one here who doesn't already owe storms. I felt the world tilt. How many storms do you owe? I asked Beck. Beck looked away, rainlight catching his profile. Enough, he said. Doesn't matter. It does, I snapped, surprising myself. Beck's gaze returned, startled. 8, he said quietly. I owe 8. I tried to stop Grindle once. She assigned me a roof collapse, a landslide, a ferry accident, and 5 miscellaneous weather incidents. She turned my life into a cautionary tale. Nessa's voice softened. I owe 3, she said. A flash flood in my childhood neighborhood that the city pretended was unpredictable. They needed a scapegoat for faulty drainage. My throat tightened. So we do this, I said, voice shaking. And we shove the storms back onto the people who made them. Beck nodded. We make the ledger honest, he said. The umbrellas overhead rustled, as if listening. My city-issued umbrella in my hand spoke, softer now. Honest. It sounded like longing. I stood beneath the umbrella canopy and lifted the recorder like a microphone. The first umbrella I addressed was a faded red one with a cracked handle. Hi, I said. Absurdly. I'm Maeve. I'm doing a survey. The red umbrella trembled. Static hissed. Then a voice, thin and elderly, seeped out. I was opened at a funeral, it said. The rain came sideways. The sun wouldn't cry. I swallowed hard. Okay, I whispered. Thank you. I pressed record, and the hinge ring in the ground pulsed once. Nessa crouched beside it, eyes bright. It registered, she breathed. Beck nodded, jaw tight. Keep going, he said. I turned to a striped umbrella that smelled faintly of perfume. You, I said. The striped one clicked. First kiss behind the aquarium. It said, voice breathless. Salt on lips. He lied about his name. The hinge pulsed again, stronger. I moved down the line, calling to umbrellas, like I was doing roll call for ghosts. Each one answered with a memory. A child's laughter under monsoon rain. A fight in a parking lot. A proposal rejected. A woman practicing a speech under drizzle. A man waiting outside a hospital while the rain did what rain always does, falling without apology. The air thickened with emotion. The courtyard filling with murmurs like an audience. The hinge ring vibrated until my knees felt it. Nessa's face was wet with rain and maybe tears. Beck's hands clenched and unclenched. My own umbrella spoke between interviews, guiding me. Left, it whispered. There, it urged, tugging my arm toward certain umbrellas like it could smell the most potent memories. I didn't ask how it knew. I just followed. The moment the hinge began to whine, like a machine overstressed, the courtyard boundary flickered. A voice echoed from the alley, Miss Grindle's, bright and too calm. Maeve, darling, you're in an unauthorized storage zone. That's a safety concern. Nessa swore. Beck's eyes narrowed. She's here, he said. My umbrella hissed. Danger. I kept interviewing, because stopping felt like letting the city win. Blue umbrella with the broken rib, I said, voice cracking. Tell me. The blue umbrella's voice was a teenager's sob. I was opened over my mother's head when the landlord yelled. It said, I hated her for not leaving. The hinge ring flared, and for a second the air tasted like lightning. Beck grabbed my shoulder. Maeve, he said urgently. We're close. Nessa looked up, eyes fierce. One more big one, she said. We need one memory that's tied to the ledger itself. My umbrella pulsed and tugged me toward the far end of the courtyard, where an umbrella hung upside down, black canopy stitched with pale thread like veins. It looked less like rain protection and more like a wound. As I reached for it, the boundary shattered with a gust, and Miss Grindle stepped into the courtyard in a perfectly dry trench coat. She carried no umbrella. She didn't need one. The wind curled around her like it was on payroll. Ah, she said, smiling. The Quiet Weather Club. How quaint. Her eyes landed on Beck. Still playing caretaker, Beck? Still pretending the city didn't help you find purpose? Beck's jaw flexed. You assigned me 8 storms, he said. You broke my life. Miss Grindle sighed as if he'd accused her of misfiling. I balanced a ledger, she said. We all do our part. She turned to me. Maeve Sato, she said warmly. I'm disappointed. I offered you steady work. You chose this. She gestured at the umbrellas, now murmuring like a hive. You're trespassing. You're interfering with municipal risk allocation. She said risk allocation like it was a flower arrangement. I felt anger rise, hot and clean. You're stealing disasters from the city and pinning them on people, I said. You're stealing weather. Miss Grindle's smile didn't falter. Weather has always belonged to the city, she said. We simply manage ownership. My umbrella hissed, and I realized it was shaking. Not from fear, but rage. Miss Grindle raised a small device in her hand, an official-looking scanner. Inventory discrepancy, she said sweetly. Return the umbrella unit, and I'll consider reducing your assigned storm count to 3. My stomach dropped. Assigned storm count. She spoke as if it was inevitable. I lifted my chin. I don't owe you anything, I said. Miss Grindle tilted her head. Everyone owes the city, she replied. The question is what you pay with. She pointed the scanner at my umbrella. The handle lights blinked wildly. The umbrella screamed, not in words but in a burst of wind that knocked Miss Grindle's hat off and sent it skittering across wet brick. Beck lunged, grabbing the hat and hurling it aside like an insult. Nessa moved, quick, slamming a wrench into the hinge ring's edge. Sparks flew. The umbrellas overhead rattled, voices rising. The black stitched umbrella in front of me trembled. I grabbed it by the handle and felt it pulse like a heart. Tell me, I whispered. The umbrella's voice came out in Kai's tone, young, tired, furious. I watched them rewrite the storm log, it said. I watched Grindle delete the city's fault and paste my name in the margin. I watched the council cheer when the budget balanced. My vision blurred. The hinge ring blazed under my feet. Miss Grindle's smile cracked. Stop that, she snapped, and the wind lunged at me like a hand. Beck stepped between, taking the gust full in the chest. He grunted, staggered, but didn't fall. Maeve, he rasped. Now, Nessa shouted. Dump it! I didn't know what that meant until my umbrella screamed again. Open, it begged. The belt was gone. The canopy unfurled on its own, and wind roared through it as if it were a funnel. The courtyard's overhead umbrellas spun, their memories pouring out in a storm of voices that collided with the hinge ring like water hitting a blocked drain. The ring shrieked, the spiral symbol glowing white-hot. And for a second, I saw the ledger, not paper, not code, but a web of lines connecting storms to names, disasters to bodies, Weather to blame. Miss. Grindle stood at the edge of it, hands out, trying to hold the web in place like someone trying to stop a net from tearing. She looked, in that second, less like a bureaucrat and more like a person terrified of being exposed as small. No, she whispered, and the word sounded real. Then the hinge snapped. The sound was not an explosion but a deep, satisfying click, like a lock releasing. Wind surged outward, not violent but free, and the courtyard umbrellas flared open in unison like 1,000 flowers. Miss. Grindle stumbled back, coat finally dampening as rain found her. The scanner in her hand sparked and died. The spiral ring dimmed, and the web I'd seen dissolved into the air, unspooling toward the city skyline. Somewhere far above, thunder rolled, not as threat but as consequence returning to its source. Miss. Grindle's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, face draining. System alert. Nessa read aloud from over her shoulder, because Nessa had no respect for privacy when justice was on the table. Risk allocation failure. Storm liability reverted to municipal account. Miss. Grindle's mouth opened, then closed. Beck laughed once, sharp and broken. You did it, he breathed, looking at me like I'd moved the moon. I swayed, exhausted, umbrella heavy in my hands. The black-stitched umbrella in my grip trembled and spoke one last time. Voice fading. Thank you. Then it went silent, fabric sagging like it had finally slept. Miss. Grindle straightened, smoothing her damp coat with trembling fingers. You have no idea what you've done, she said, voice brittle. The city can't absorb that many storms. It will panic. It will crumble. Nessa stepped forward, eyes hard. Maybe, she said, or maybe it will finally build drains that work. Miss. Grindle's eyes flicked to me. Her smile tried to return and failed. Maeve, she said quietly, you'll regret being noticed. I met her gaze and surprised myself with steadiness. Better noticed than erased, I said. Miss. Grindle's face tightened. She turned and walked out of Block 11, rain finally soaking her, the wind no longer flattering her steps. In the days that followed, Brightwell became loud with accountability. The council held emergency sessions. News outlets suddenly brave reported on irregularities in storm liability. People in Block 11 laughed in the street, as if laughter could be a barricade. On my phone, unknown numbers stopped texting. My municipal umbrella stopped talking. But sometimes its handle light blinked softly at dusk, as if it remembered how to be alive. Nessa's shop became a hub for whispered plans and paper cups of tea. Beck crossed the boundary more often now, like a man testing whether his leash had been cut. The first time he walked into my normal street without flinching, I felt something in my chest loosen. Does it still follow you? I asked, watching his eyes track the wind's invisible movement. Beck exhaled. Not as hungry, he said. It used to pull at me like a debt collector. Now it feels like weather. He looked at my umbrella. It chose you, he added. It didn't have to. It chose anyone who answered, I said, trying to deflect the weight of that. Beck's lips quirked. Most people don't answer, he said. They close the umbrella and pretend it didn't speak. You don't pretend. I rolled my eyes. I do pretend, I said. I just pretend badly. Nessa snorted from behind the counter. You pretended your way into a revolution, she said. That's talent. The city's panic came in predictable forms. Blame shifting, committees, press statements that used the word transparency like perfume. But it also came in less predictable forms. Repairs. Crews showed up in low-income neighborhoods to fix gutters and reinforce roofs because suddenly the ledger punished the city for neglect. Storm drains were cleared. Cooling centers were funded. The bakery on Quill Street got a new gutter. And the owner cried in the doorway, wiping flour off her cheeks like she was embarrassed to be grateful. Meanwhile, the umbrella census became a scandal. Miss. Grindle resigned for personal reasons, which is how bureaucracies say we pushed her off the stage, but we won't admit we had hands. I was asked, politely then not politely, to testify at hearings. I said no. Nessa said no louder. Beck said yes once, and when he spoke about assigned storms, the council room went silent in a way that made my skin prickle. He looked at me in the audience only once, and his gaze was steady enough to keep me upright. Afterward, outside the building under a sky that threatened rain but held back, he handed me a cheap umbrella from a street vendor. For normal weather, he said. I stared. Is this a date? I asked, because sarcasm is the only armor I trust. Beck's ears turned faintly pink. It's an umbrella, he said. It's also a date if you stop talking, he added, then immediately looked like he wanted to throw himself into the river. I laughed, surprised and warm. Fine, I said, but if it starts talking, I'm sending it to you. Beck's mouth curved. Deal, he said. On the first real storm after the ledger broke, Brightwell did not collapse. It struggled, trees bent, rain hammered roofs, the river rose, and for a few tense hours the city held its breath. But the drains worked better. The alerts went out on time. Sandbags appeared in neighborhoods that used to be forgotten. People showed up for one another because when the city stops outsourcing disaster, citizens stop believing they're alone. I stood under my normal vendor umbrella with Beck beside me at the edge of Block 11, watching the courtyard canopy sway gently in the wind like a choir at rest. My municipal umbrella, now quiet, hung overhead among the others, just fabric and ribs again, no longer desperate. Nessa joined us, hood up, arms crossed. Kai's storm count cleared, she said, checking her phone. The city's system reversed the assignments. He's free. Beck's breath shuddered. Where is he? He asked. Nessa pointed toward the far alley where the wind curled softly. Somewhere between weather and person, she said, but less trapped. Beck nodded, eyes glossy. That's enough, he murmured. I didn't know what to say, so I did the only thing I was good at. I offered my arm. Beck took it without hesitation, fingers warm through my sleeve, and the simple contact felt like a new kind of inventory, one that didn't belong to the city. Above us, the umbrellas rustled. For a second, I thought I heard a whisper, faint as rain on paper. Thank you. Then the storm moved on, as storms do. Not assigned, not stolen, just weather wild, honest, and finally ours to face together. Success did not make my life simpler. It made it scheduled. The council demanded testimony from anyone who had entered an unauthorized meteorological zone, which was their polite way of saying, we saw the footage, we know you broke our invisible rules, please explain it in a room with microphones. I tried to refuse. Nessa laughed. You can't refuse a bureaucracy, she said. You can only outlast it. Beck, meanwhile, began sleeping poorly. I'd catch him staring at the sky like it was a list of debts. What follows you? I asked him one evening as we sat on the river steps eating dumplings from a paper tray. He shrugged. The urge to fix everything, he said, and the people who want me to stop trying. His humor was dry, but his eyes were tired, and suddenly I understood. He wasn't just a guide. He was a line item the city had been trying to erase for years. The hearing was held in the council hall, a building that looked like it had been designed by a person who hated weather and loved echoes. The room was packed. Reporters, council members, a few angry citizens clutching umbrellas like shields. Miss Grindle sat at a long table with a legal team and a smile that never got wet. When I entered, murmurs fluttered. Someone whispered, "That's the umbrella girl." Someone else whispered, "She's shorter than I thought." Beck stood near the back, arms crossed, looking like he'd rather wrestle a storm than sit through speeches. Nessa sat beside the press row, tapping her pen like a metronome. A council member in a pale suit asked me to swear an oath. I raised my hand and realized my palm was still faintly marked with the spiral pattern from the hinge, like ink that hadn't decided to fade. "Do you affirm you will tell the truth?" he asked. "I affirm I will tell the truth I can prove," I said, and the room gasped as if honesty was a threat. They tried to make the story silly. They called Block 11 a folkloric anomaly. They asked if I'd consumed substances. They asked if I'd been sleep-deprived. Yes. And whether my work had predisposed me to imaginative interpretations, please. Miss. Grindle's lawyer leaned forward and said, "Miss Quill, isn't it true you were disciplined twice for improper form filing?" I blinked. "Once," I said, "and it was because the city's staplers are sadistic." A few people laughed, and the lawyer's face tightened. Then I placed my recorder on the table and played the Umbrella Voices' Funeral Rain, First Kiss Drizzle, Eviction Storm, the way weather can be a witness. The chamber quieted. People shifted, uncomfortable with the intimacy of other people's days. Miss Grindle's smile faltered for the first time. When the voice of a child's umbrella said, "I was opened over a broken bike, and the mother said it was okay to cry," someone in the back row started sobbing. The council member's throat bobbed. "This is unprecedented," he whispered. No, Nessa muttered loudly enough for microphones to catch. This is overdue. After the hearing, Brightwell did what it always did. It organized a formal event to pretend it was in control of the narrative. The mayor announced a rebalancing gala to celebrate community resilience, which is the phrase people use when they want applause without responsibility. Tickets were expensive. The location was the glass atrium downtown, where rain sounded like art instead of danger. Nessa wanted us there. We need eyes, she said. We need cameras. We need you to look harmless while we reroute the last of the ledger backups. I stared at her. You want me at a gala, I said, as bait. As a symbol, she corrected. Beck watched me from the doorway, expression unreadable. She's not bait, he said quietly. She's a person. Nessa lifted both hands. Fine, a person who can also be a symbol. She tossed me a garment bag. Also, you need to wear something that says, I belong here, which is a lie we'll weaponize. The night of the gala, I discovered my body was capable of new forms of panic. The dress Nessa had procured was a storm cloud gray, fitted in a way that made my posture feel like a contract. Beck showed up in a suit that looked borrowed from a past life. The jacket fit his shoulders too well to be random. He had combed his hair and, tragically, looked like a person who could break hearts in a lobby. When he saw me, his eyes widened for half a second before he recovered. You look official, he said. You look like you're about to apologize for a hurricane, I replied. He smiled, small. Maybe I am, he said. At the atrium entrance, a photographer snapped our picture, and the flash made us blink in sync like a couple. I realized with a jolt that, for the night, we would need to perform something the city understood. Partnership. They'll ask, Nessa had warned. Why you're together? People like simple stories. Beck offered his arm. We can do simple, he murmured. It might even be true in some direction. My heart did an unhelpful flip. I took his arm. All right, I murmured. We do simple. Inside, the gala glittered with expensive glassware and people who spoke in quiet, practiced voices. Every table had umbrellas as centerpieces, miniature, decorative, useless. I hated them immediately. Miss Grindle glided through the crowd like she owned the dry air, stopping to laugh at jokes she did not find funny. When she saw me, she paused, smile sharpening. Maeve, she said, as if tasting my name. I'm so glad you could join our celebration. Beck's arm tightened slightly. Not possessive, but steadying. We got an invitation, I said. It seemed rude to ignore it. Miss Grindle's gaze flicked to Beck. And you are? Beck met her eyes without flinching. A citizen, he said. Ah, Miss Grindle said, and her smile turned thin, because in Brightwell, citizen was not a title she respected. A councilman approached, eyes bright with gossip. Miss Quill, he boomed. We've heard fascinating things. Are you working with this gentleman? I felt the trap spring. Name him, label him, reduce him. Before I could answer, Beck leaned down and pressed a brief kiss to my temple so light it could have been a secret. I'm with Maeve, he said simply. The councilman laughed, satisfied. Miss Grindle's eyes narrowed. My face warmed. The kiss had been performance, but my body didn't know the difference between stage and truth. We moved through the crowd like we belonged, which was easier and harder than I expected. People asked polite questions that were actually tests. How did you meet? What do you do? Are you enjoying the new policies? Beck answered with calm half-truths. We met in the rain, he said. We do logistics, he said. We enjoy accountability, he said. And some people laughed because they thought it was a joke. Under the table, my hand found his, and he didn't pull away. Nessa, disguised as a caterer, slipped between tables with a tray and a tiny earpiece. 2 minutes, she mouthed as she passed. I nodded, trying not to look like a person participating in municipal sabotage. Then the atrium's decorative umbrella centerpieces began to tremble. Not all at once, but like a rumor traveling. A flutter here, a quiver there. Beck stiffened. Do you feel that? He murmured. I did. The air pressure shifted, the way it does right before rain decides to be dramatic. The ledger backups, Beck said, voice low. They're trying to spool the hinge remotely. My stomach dropped. Here? I whispered. In public? Beck's gaze swept the ceiling. They don't care about public, he said. They care about control. The glass roof above us darkened as if a shadow passed, but there were no clouds outside. Miss Grindle looked up, and for the first time all night, she looked scared. Nessa's voice crackled in my earpiece. She had somehow gotten me one too, clipped under my collar like a guilty secret. "They found the relay," she hissed. "They're routing Stormdet into the atrium to drown the broadcast. If the glass roof floods, the story becomes, unruly protesters destroyed the gala, not, the city tried to steal weather again." I swallowed. The atrium was full of people who could evacuate in sleek cars. The kitchen staff and servers could not. Also, I was wearing a dress that could not run. Beck squeezed my hand. "We can break it," he said. "How?" I asked. He nodded toward the decorative umbrellas. "They're connected," he said. "They're smaller units, but they're still units. If we can get them to speak, we can overload the relay." I stared at him. "You want me to interview centerpieces?" I said incredulously. Beck's mouth twitched. "You've done worse," he said. He was right. I took a breath, stepped onto the low stage where the mayor had been preparing to give a speech, and lifted the microphone. The sound system screeched. Heads turned. Miss Grindle's eyes widened. The mayor froze. I leaned into the mic and said, "Clearly, if you have ever used an umbrella to hide tears, please open it now." The room rippled with confusion. "Maeve," Beck whispered, behind me. "What are you doing?" "Simple story," I whispered back. "Everyone understands rain." Then I lifted one of the decorative umbrellas from a table and snapped it open. It shuddered and shockingly emitted a whisper. I was opened over champagne. Laughter bubbled. Another umbrella fluttered. I was opened over a divorce. Silence returned, heavier. I found the service staircase behind a curtain of decorative ferns. Beck followed, silent, moving like someone who had navigated emergencies before. The staircase smelled of bleach and backstage sweat. Above us, we heard the atrium's glass roof ping as rain began to thicken. Nessa's voice in my earpiece turned sharp. "They found the relay. Tomas is cutting the siphon from the basement. We need someone to get to the roof latch before the debt concentrates." "Roof latch?" I panted. Beck's mouth tightened. "A hinge," he said, and his tone made it clear he had hoped never to see it again. We burst onto a maintenance catwalk beneath the glass roof. Rain hammered above, turning the city lights into smears. A narrow ladder climbed to a hatch. Beck met my eyes. "You shouldn't," he began. "I will," I said, because fear had already eaten too much of my life for breakfast. I climbed. The hatch fought me with stubborn suction, but when I shoved, it opened with a wet gasp, and wind slapped my face like a cold palm. The roof was slick. I crawled on hands and knees, dress soaked, hair lashing my cheeks, while Beck stayed at the hatch, braced to catch me if I slid. "Maeve," he called once, not as a warning but as an anchor. The latch was a metal clasp shaped like a spiral, Brightwell's favorite symbol for managed weather. I recognized it from the hinge ring in Block 11. My umbrella, strapped to my wrist now, buzzed faintly, the handle light blinking, as if it too was afraid of what the city could do with a storm. Below, the gala continued, oblivious, laughter and strings muffled by glass and rain. The city would love to make this flood a headline. Reckless whistleblowers ruin a civic celebration. I wrapped my fingers around the clasp and felt it vibrate with someone else's intentions, a tug toward damage. "No," I whispered, and pulled. The clasp resisted, then clicked. The sensation was like exhaling after holding your breath for years. Wind surged. Rain stopped being pressed into the roof like a weapon and began to slide away, redirected into ordinary gutters and ordinary drains. The storm debt that had been routed here, concentrated to cause a spectacle, broke into a scatter of regular weather. Still wet, still loud, but no longer targeted. The glass roof shuddered, then steadied. Below, guests gasped as a sheet of water that had been gathering above their heads thinned into harmless rivulets. A few people clapped because they mistook survival for theater. I crawled back to the hatch, hands raw, and Beck hauled me down with a strength that felt almost angry. For a second, we were pressed close in the narrow space, his breath warm against my wet hair. He didn't kiss me. Instead, he rested his forehead against mine, eyes closed, as if he was learning to trust that the city hadn't taken me. "You did it," he said, voice rough. "We did it," I corrected, and his mouth twitched like he wanted to argue but couldn't find the energy. When we returned to the gala dripping, people stared. Miss Grindle's smile finally cracked when she saw water on my sleeves and Beck's hair damp. A maintenance issue, I said sweetly before she could speak. Very dramatic. The mayor laughed too loudly and called for more champagne. 2 weeks later, Brightwell held its first umbrella amnesty. It sounded like a joke until you saw the lines. People arriving with battered umbrellas, parasols, broken canopies, walking sticks that were really umbrellas in denial. They brought them to a plaza near the river, where volunteers tagged them and logged their origins, not for punishment, but for return. Some umbrellas were reunited with owners who cried as if the fabric held the last warmth of a lost day. Others were left unclaimed and offered to Block 11 as shelter, not as prison. For the first time, the umbrella courtyard was treated as a community archive instead of a landfill of debt. On the last day of the amnesty, Beck stood beside me by the river, our shoulders touching. He looked less haunted, though the sky still made him flinch sometimes. Nessa was across the plaza, shouting directions at a council intern like it was cardio. Tomas was explaining hinges to a curious kid with a strawberry umbrella. The air smelled like wet paper and roasted sugar from the bakery cart someone had finally allowed into the square. Beck cleared his throat. I should tell you something, he said. That the city will try again? I asked. Probably, he admitted, but that's not it. He took my hand, slow, giving me every chance to pull away, and when I didn't, his thumb brushed the inside of my wrist like a secret. I stayed in Block 11 because I thought I deserved it, he said. Storm debt, unpaid promises, all the things I couldn't fix. Then you showed up and treated it like a place worth mapping, like a place worth saving. You made me want to step outside without fearing what follows. He looked at me, eyes steady. I don't know what comes next, Maeve, but I know I want to be in it with you. My umbrella's handle light blinked once, bright as a wink. I laughed, because if I didn't laugh I would cry in public, and Brightwell would probably invoice me for that. Okay, I said, voice small but certain, but you have to promise something too. Beck's eyebrows lifted. Anything, he said, reckless. I leaned closer. No more letting the city decide what you